I want to express really my gratitude to EMDR and to SE, to these two trauma modalities, which have so enriched my practice and my understanding of the body-mind. I also want to thank you. You're not all sitting in the same place, but I want to thank you for inviting me to speak tonight, because it forced me to articulate and to make sense of things that I'm doing intuitively, and I appreciate that opportunity. So what I'm, a full disclosure, okay, I am an EMDR therapist, but I am, I guess, more of an SE person, so, you know, you'll have to forgive me for that, okay? So I'm going to be expanding the definition of the words in my title, okay? The title was Bilaterality and Somatics. So you can learn about me already that I have trouble fitting into the protocol, okay? Sorry. Okay. Anyway, for me, these words have much broader meaning and applicability than they're conventionally used with. So I want to try to show you how thinking this way can give you greater flexibility and creativity so that you can tailor and custom every intervention, not just to a different client, to each specific client, but you can actually tailor-make it to the specific moment, in that present moment in the room. So my favorite intervention with BLS these days is using something called active pause.
What?
Active pause. Active pause. And it was initiated by someone named Serge Prengel, who's a focusing practitioner and an SEP, a somatic experiencing practitioner. He's got a great website if you want to learn more about it. It is called, amazingly, Active Pause. Okay? And what you do, this is the instruction, okay, is you hold the ball, squeeze the ball, and transfer it. Okay? המטופל, אבל אחר כך אני אסביר שאני גם עושה את זה במקביל, okay? So you're transferring the ball from hand to hand without speaking for 60 seconds. And as you're doing this, I get to speak because I'm teaching it, right? But while you're doing this, you're paying attention to the sensation, okay, to the weight of the ball, to its give, okay? And you do this in silence for 60 seconds. Right? The sound that it makes as it hits your palm, the way your hands receive it, the way your hands transfer it. So just notice how many senses are already involved in this exercise. So what I'd like to do is describe to you two brief examples of how it worked in my office. Okay? The first is a 19-year-old computer genius. He's describing his dilemma regarding his homosexuality for the umpteenth time. Kilu 10,000 פעם already. We're going over the same words, the same stuck place, okay? So he's very cerebral, and I ask him to humor me, you know, and just try this. Okay, he rolls his eyes. You're going to do that weird thing again with me, okay? But only 60 seconds, I promised just 60 seconds, and I have a lot of credit with him, so he agrees. He follows the instructions very carefully, okay? And after the 60 seconds are up, I say to him, what's coming up now? And he bursts into tears. This is an unprecedented event in 6 years of seeing him, okay? Just completely sobbing. Okay, so that's one example. The second example is my 6-year-old granddaughter, who is famous not just for her unbelievable personality, but also for her very dramatic scenes. Okay? And once she starts a tantrum, everybody settles in for the long haul, hoping against hope that it will be over in an hour. Okay? Now, so one Shabbos, she was over at my house, and she starts to get hysterical, or as my daughter says, janana, okay? I hope that's not a bad word. I'm just repeating it, you know, I don't know what it means. Okay. Anyway, so I invite her into my office which is a big pinook. Okay, so she comes into my office and I give her one of these balls and I tell her to pass it from hand to hand, paying careful attention to the ball. Now, I had to count out loud with her because I said, we're going to count, okay? 67, we're going to count. I had to count out loud so that I drowned out the sound of the crying. You just have to appreciate this, okay? So she didn't need 60 seconds, which is true for kids in general. They just process quicker, right? Got to 15, she's already calm. Okay, completely calm at 15. So what happened in these two examples? The combination of the bilateral stimulation and the sensory focus, together with the sensory focus, bakan v'achshav, like right now, sorry, thank you. The combination of BLS, together with the sensory focus on how it feels right now in your hands, the sound it makes, the way it feels when you squeeze it. The combination of those two help shift each of these people to a different part of their brain. The 19-year-old shifted from his left brain to his right brain. And the 6-year-old shifted from her right brain to her left brain. Now, this happened in seconds, okay? So it's a very short bilateral intervention which opens up a whole new place inside of each of them. I use this brief intervention when a client is stuck or when they're using like a repetitive tape. You know, it's that time where you cannot bear, they're going to say the same thing again. You know, that's the moment, okay? So, and sometimes I use it even when I'm stuck, okay, because it works for me too. And by the way, you know, in answer to the question from before, I have two balls and I am doing this together with them while they are doing it. Okay, this accomplishes many things, not the least of which it makes them feel less stupid. Okay, so that's very important. Now, bilateral, the word bilateral, it can refer not just to left or right, like the two sides of the body or the two sides of the brain, but it also can refer to two sides. And I'm going to argue that it's two sides of anything. Okay, and let me explain. So this is how I understand pendulation. Okay, how do you say it? It's mitutelet? Okay. So pendulatia, lamarati. Okay. So this is how I understand pendulation. Now, originally, this idea was taught to me in SE as alternating between the trauma vortex and the healing vortex. But my clinical experience, which at this point is 18 years, okay, of working with SE, has taught me that a simple back and forth movement of any kind, just alternating between one thing and another thing, can dislodge and change, lazuz, lina'er, okay? Alternating can dislodge and change a thought or an image which is stuck in the brain. And this back and forth movement doesn't have to be physical eye movement or hand tapping. Okay? It also doesn't have to be heresy. It doesn't have to be between a resource and a trauma. Okay? Often, it's enough for this pendulation to take place in the mind itself, shifting attention within the mind from one image to another, or from one body location to another. And this back and forth movement also works wonders with narrative, with a story, when you can move back and forth in time, from past to present, or from the end to the beginning, and then back again. And this pendulating movement creates a sense of flow, which is the opposite experience of stuckness. So more about the word somatic. Using somatic awareness within the body itself often involves shifting inner attention, mindful inner attention, from one body part or location to another, from top to bottom, like from head to the legs, or from inside to outside, like from the breath to the skin, or from front to back, like from the chest to the spine. But I also work somatically with the space in the room, using it as an extension of the physical body. So it becomes the somatic experience of the room around you, and not just the experience that's inside your body. Now I need to insert and underline the word experience, this type of work is not something that comes across so well in a cerebral explanation. You have to have the experience. And so if you have no exposure to this, then be kind to yourself if you don't get it yet. Okay? So I want to use sight as an example of how I work with the space in the room. I invite a client to pendulate between near and far. לעבור בין לבין. מטולטל, מטולטל. הלוך וחזור.
ההנחיה שלך היא שהוא ידמיין
נגיד, יש איום, there's a threat, okay? And I'll say, can we put him over there? Okay? Please notice the way I'm using my hands, even though I'm handicapped and only have one at the moment. So we're putting him over there, okay? And so I've distanced the threat. The threat is farther away, right? Can you notice, as you're looking over there at him over there, what's happening inside you as you're looking, okay? So you're going back and forth from the threat to the body response to it, okay? Now, I often use my hands to like visually assign space for where things are, okay? You know, like put this here and put that there. So for example, you love him and respect him so much, and yet he did this horrible thing, okay? So I'm providing like a visual way to organize confusing, contradictory, unintegrated material by giving them a physical space in the room. And also, mind you, this externalizes it outside, so the whole balbala inside is not unbearable. Okay. It makes the experience more manageable. And in doing that thing, okay, of course, I'm following the client's gaze and the client's gestures, since often they have already assigned locations for these things, but it's just not conscious on their part. Okay? Those of us that studied BSP with David Grand many years ago are used to tracking where the trauma brain spot is. Okay. Brain spotting. Don't worry. Don't worry. There's this idea that there's a trauma spot that the eyes remember, and it has to do with a specific location. And you can track that by noticing when the eyes widen or when there's a flinch in the eyes, okay? In my experience, I have often found that the trauma therapy is actually in the area where they refuse to look, okay? The space they're not looking at. I don't request or invite a safe place because I have found that that question is an immediate trigger to most of my traumatized clients. So instead, I ask them to just check out the room and see if there's something neutral, possibly pleasant, or for sure quiet. Okay, something neutral or quiet that you can look at. Now, when you're using body cues, like I'm explaining now, to locate threat and safety in the room, the shift in focus from one to the other often involves eye movement, right? But I don't isolate the eye movement the way I was taught in EMDR, and I have to say I studied EMDR in like 1994, and I understand that it's moved differently and more somatically since then. But I was taught you don't move the head, you just move the eyes. Okay, that's still the case. Okay, so I don't do that because for the following reason. The way I'm having the client pendulate, pendulate between these visual spots in the room also makes use of the orienting reflex, which involves moving the neck. Okay, and if you have to look around the room, you have to do it this way. Okay, you can't take in the whole room with your head fixed. And Stephen Porges I don't know how familiar you are with his work, but he's a researcher, a scientist who has created a new understanding of the nervous system. He teaches about the crucial role that neck movement plays in ventral vagal function. And so moving the neck helps bring the social engagement system online. And this intervention, literally moving the head to look around the room, okay, one sweep and then another sweep, is going to return a person to their window of tolerance. Try it. It works like a charm, okay? So here is an example. How am I doing with the time? What did you tell me? 10? Okay. So this is an example. 20 דקות, תודה. זה הולך יותר מהר באנגלית. I read it in Hebrew. It's 15 minutes longer. Okay. So here's an example where I also pendulate between different areas of the brain, okay, which Nadja has so carefully and beautifully, okay, outlined, right? So in this example, I am toggling. Do you know that word? It's like a computer word. It doesn't matter. It's alternating, going back and forth, okay, between the neocortex and the limbic system, or the neocortex and the reptilian brain, okay? So here's a description. Lily volunteered for a demo in one of my trainings, hoping to deal with her persistent, scary thoughts. I am constantly afraid that something terrible will happen to people I love. I've always been worried about that ever since I know myself. So take one of those thoughts, I ask, just one, okay? So what is that? Take one of those thoughts, it's a cognition, and I'm asking her to select one. It's also a cortical task, right? So she takes one. You can see when someone has one, okay? So what happens in your body when you have that thought? Okay, this is a sensation question. She says, I can't breathe. I've always had trouble with my breath. I have allergies, and she starts a list of all the things that are wrong with her breath. So I ground her until her breath settles down, because when someone tells you I can't breathe, it's a survival emergency. This is not something you skip over when they say I can't breathe, okay? So I ground her, and I asked her what she knows about her birth, okay, which is a question of narrative, yes? So she has to tell me a story. She says, actually, I was born with a cord around my neck. There was real respiratory distress. Which part of her brain is she in? Okay. Is there an image that comes up when you say that? Where am I moving her to? Down. Okay, there's an image that comes up as you say that, which moves her to her right brain. Because the confusing thing about this triune thing is that there's also like two halves. Yes? Okay. But anyway. Is there an image that comes up as you say that? And she says, I see a baby with a gray complexion about to suffocate. So I noticed the spatial location of the scary image in the room, the place where her eyes widened as she looked and then looked away. I grounded her in the present moment. Notice the ground beneath your feet, the chair, you know, you're familiar with these grounding techniques. And I invited her to look around the room to find something pleasant or quiet to look at. So she looks around the room. She finds a resource spot, which was a color. She says, I like that color pink. That's simple. Okay, forget people, forget those sticky things. Okay, a pink color that she liked. The more concrete, the better it works. But the neck movement, as she had searched for something, had already regulated her, and she was much calmer. Now, I want to stress here that this is not simply replacing a traumatic image with a good image. This is actually, this targil of looking around, is actually widening her visual field, reinstating her ability to orient, so that her mind can take in more of what's really there. Instead of being transfixed, what is that in Hebrew? Mekubat, thank you, by the fear. Okay, it's already giving her this additional flexibility, and the wording is important. As you're aware of that scary image, see if there's also something else to look at in the room right now, something more quiet, more neutral. Okay, so I'm not negating the fright. Okay, this ability to tolerate opposites, I think, is a reflection of health and also of regulatory capacity. Okay, which is, I think, what we're working on all the time. And the movement itself, looking around the room, is also an antidote to the rigid body experience which characterizes fear. So back to Lily, right? She says, that pink color makes me think of a healthy baby with pink cheeks, crying loudly. She smiles tenderly, as we do when we see a sweet baby. Okay? So as she smiles, I notice she's looking at a spot to my right, whereas the baby in respiratory distress was to my left. Okay? So I had a number of options at that point. You can see in the examples that Nadja gave and that Ganit gave that there are these nexus points, there are these choice points where you can do more of this or more of that. You can go back to BLS, you can, okay. So I had many options. This is one of the things I like about SE because the working map is general, you know, and it's not such a specific protocol, which you could argue is also a problem, I know. Now, if I wanted to insert EMDR at that point, I could invite her. I could just say, so just shift your eyes from one image to the other, you know, back and forth slowly, okay, without staying too long in either position. So I don't even have to do this, okay? She's already located the two poles, okay? Or I could take her back into her body, as in, as you smile at that pink baby, what happens inside? And in that case, I would follow her associations and her process wherever it would lead. Either way, whichever way I'm using, I would check on the initial frightening image later in the session to make sure it had lost its power over her. Now, clearly, these two baby images, which are opposites in every way, are now linked or associated in her mind, leading to a memory that is now reprocessed, reconsolidated, or whichever lingo you like to use about this now. Okay, now, when you're working this way, anything imaginary needs to be embodied. I have looked hard for a Hebrew word for embodied, okay? There isn't one. Okay, so let's just say, no, let's not go there. Okay, let's just not go there. So I'm just going to say that it needs to be experienced in the body, okay? In the present moment, even if it's imaginary, right? Whether it's a resource or whether it's a trauma. And the next case example I'm going to read is going to illustrate this, okay? But I want to say that anything that happens in the room can be made into a somatic experience without necessarily asking the client to go inside and see what's there. Not all clients can sense the body. And not all clients should be asked to do so. Okay? I have about 4 days worth of things to say about that, so we're not doing that now.
You said that you need to embody, and then said, what do you do with clients that are not...
Ask me later, okay? So about creating, actually this is an answer. This is a partial answer. Creating something in the room that can be a somatic experience. Now, the 5 senses are the best place to start, okay? So I've already discussed a little bit how to use sight, and now I want to give you an example of touch, okay? I keep in my office, I collect, to my husband's great chagrin, from all of our vacations. I schlep home stones, okay, that I have picked because of how they feel and because of how they look. And there are varied shapes and varied textures and varied weights, okay? And you use these to keep your clients in the here and now, okay? And at the same time as I'm doing this, I'm holding stones, okay? I'm doing what I've asked them to do, okay? And this accomplishes a few things. It models somatic awareness, okay? It models curiosity, because I'm getting really into this. And I've interrupted my speaking, and so I'm modeling that time out for a sensory thing. But it also engages mirror neurons. So even if they don't cooperate, okay, what's happening as they look at you in their brain is amazingly the same thing that's happening in your brain as you're doing it, okay? So you're exploring the rock in your hand, and those same neurons are lighting up in your client's brain. Using the stones also evokes attachment patterns, but that's not our topic for today. I just had to mention it, right? Another thing you can do is invite movement in the therapy room. So you had a few examples with Ganit and Nadja about the way in which they were tracking tiny movements, or the way in which they were slowing down movements. I'm going to mention a different type of movement where for a client who tends to dissociate, okay, you just invite them to stand up. Just stand up a minute, and you stand with them. You don't watch them do what you say. You always do it at the same time. So you stand up and just feel the weight of your body on your feet. Okay? If it's really bad and you need to keep them even stronger, you know, just walk around a minute, you know, and see how it is. Notice the ground underneath you as you're stepping. It is a different sort of grounding, but what's important here is the movement is a counter to dissociation. Okay, like you've seen, we had the guy from, I forgot his name, a couple years ago who played catch, you know, with his soldiers. What? Yeah, okay, so that's another example. Okay, but it's banking on the fact, it's counting on the fact that it's a very old memory, and they'll be able to catch and throw without investing a lot of concentration in it. It's the same thing is true of just standing up. Chances are good they'll get that right. You know, just stand up, just take a few steps. You don't have to be super present, right, to do that. Okay. Okay, so maybe I'll just read the case. You're okay with the English? Yes, I can read in English. So Karen comes to see me. She's looking for EMDR work. Her presenting problem is that she feels she's too reactive to her adult son's moods. He's like over 30, okay? His ups and downs disturb her greatly. She feels he's very fragile. She worries about him, she always has. From the beginning, the day after he was born, he suddenly became blue in the face in the hospital. I have to just insert now that only when I was typing did I realize the two cases that came to mind. Okay, but it wasn't conscious, so here it is. She still sees that blue face now. It was so traumatic. Her own face is contorted as she remembers it. So Karen asked to do EMDR on the disturbing image. On the disturbing image of her newborn son's face when he turned blue. Her NC was, I cannot bear it. In addition to her fear of losing him, Karen processed her helplessness as a new mother, the lack of support she experienced from the hospital staff as well. At the end of that EMDR session, the SUDS went down to a 0. So at our next meeting, the next time we meet, I check on the status of her reactivity to her son's moods. She said she was no longer haunted by that hospital image, but was still afraid of the look on her son's face when he gets angry. How does it look? I said. It's all red and purple and his veins bulge out. Very frightening. She shudders, okay? Reminds me of my father. So many times I was terrified of the look on my father's face. I have to insert that just recently she had told me, I'm now realizing, this is a very evolved woman, okay? A lot of self-work, right? She says, I'm only now realizing that my mother was a victim of domestic violence. She says it just like that, without any reference to what this means about her father, okay? So she had said that like 2 weeks before, okay. So she's shuddering about all the times that she was terrified about her father's face when he was angry. So I see already that she's mutzefet, you know, that she's really flooded with a number of images already, okay, because she had just said, I can't tell you how many times I was so terrified. So I asked, would it be okay if we choose one particular memory to work on? Okay, this is titration. Okay, titration is in a lot of ways the opposite of speedy processing. Okay?
Slowing down, you mean?
Titration is taking one drop at a time instead of all the examples that connect to the same NC and to, okay, and to the same feeling. So instead you're just taking one, okay? So there's a long pause. She says, yes. One time when I was 9 years old. And as she's saying this, her face is getting younger and more vulnerable as she speaks, and her voice has become that of a child. So I stop her story, because I'm dealing with a child now, yeah? I stop her story and explain that we will be going back there differently this time, with an entire team behind her, so that she won't be there alone. Inspired by the Army, right? A small, well-trained team bearing her name, Sevet Keren. And I tell her, you can draft your own hand-picked team, choosing them for their specific abilities and their specific strengths. Who would you like to draft to your Tzevet? So she picks her husband. I ask her, what is his pakal? What is his job? Okay, what's he going to do? She says his hugs and his warm support. Then she chooses her madricha next, okay, her supervisor. Why her? I ask. She says she always sees so clearly right to the heart of things, even when it's complicated and confusing. She's not afraid to call things as they are, by their name. And she tells the truth even if it's uncomfortable. And then she adds her close friend, who's important because she's always there for her and would never let her down. When I do this, this is me in parentheses now talking to you, when I do this, I try to assign roles for all the missing pieces. Okay, for all the parts, let's not use that word, all the pieces that were not present at the time of the trauma, okay, which in her particular example would be support, nurturance, protection by an adult, safety, clarity, outspoken speech, justifiable anger. This is how I'm thinking as I'm listening. I'm thinking what was missing, because that's going to have to be part of the correction. Okay? So I ask her, where would you like to place your team right now? Now, this is my use of the space in the room. It's like spatial, geographic, physical, somatic protection, okay? More than just the idea of protection, it provides the person with the actual sensation in the here and now of what it feels to be protected, okay? And so I ask her, where would you like to place them? And like that, She has an answer. This never fails to amaze me, okay? She says, he has to stand behind me, and the two of them have to be here. It's as clear as day to her that this is the right place for them, okay? So what's it like now inside to feel them physically present alongside you? She says, it makes me feel strong and protected. My back feels straighter. And I say, I notice your chin is held higher. Now perhaps I can open the door to my mother's bedroom and see what I'm afraid to see. And she starts to stretch her hand out. And I say slowly, okay, and I turn out to be right, because she says, no, I still can't do it. And I ask, what would help you at this moment, standing at the doorway with your hand hovering over the doorknob? She says, I need a hug from my husband. Take the time to receive that hug right now. He tells me it will be all right, like he always does. And what happens inside when he says that? I soften a little bit. My shoulders loosen. I ask, is there anything else you need to hear? Yes, my friend reminds me that I survived my childhood and tells me what a competent professional I am today. She reminds me that I am not that child any longer. And what's that like for you hearing that? It's just plain true. She says like this, just true. And mind you, this it's just true is the voice of an adult, yes? Okay. So check inside and see what your body needs to do now. With an anguished sevil, with an anguished expression on her face, she says, I hate having to choose between them, to take sides. If I don't go in, I'm betraying her. If I do go in, I'm siding with her against him. Bilbul shalem. So this is like a well-timed pause, you know, where I sit with her in that bilbul.
לא הבנתי רק. מה זה בין הבעל לחברה? מה הבלבול שלו?
בין האמא לאבא.
בין האמא לאבא.
הזיכרון, כאילו אם היא נכנסת לזיכרון.
כן, פה זה הנקודה הכי טעונה. ההחלטה הזאת, האם לפתוח, you know, and just the whole, see, this is one of the things that's hardest to get used to, is you don't have clarity about the content because it wasn't explained to you in a linear way.
But her confusion was getting in or not getting in?
Her confusion is if she goes in, she's making a statement of who she sides with, because she's going in to comfort her mother. Okay. And if she doesn't go in, she's betraying her mother and siding with her father. Okay? But I want to tell you, for my purposes, I don't need to know who the actors are. I don't need to get confused about, was your mother, who was that? I don't need to know. What I need to know is how confused she was, how frozen she was because she couldn't decide. I need to know the position she found herself in, because that's where things are buried. So I pause so that we can be together in this bilbul, you know, to kind of honor how this is like so important. And then I ask, what happens in the scene now? Because with this tzevet, you know, it becomes, it has an action of its own, because we've drafted them. They have roles, and so the scene plays without me having to choreograph it. So I say, what happens in the scene now? She says, my madricha tells me very firmly that I was just a child then, and I should never have had to make that choice. I shouldn't have been put in that position. Instead of taking care of me, they made me take care of them. It wasn't right. You don't do that to kids. What's it like to hear that? Everything clears up inside. זה מאוד נכון מה שהיא אומרת. זה פשוט נכון. It's quiet inside now. So I say, wait until your body feels ready. She reaches out her hand and turns the doorknob and opens the door and says, there she is, just as I knew she would be, crying in bed. So helpless, so miserable. It's amazing how many times I saw her like that. What a sad, tragic life she lived. I was too young to see that kind of misery. There was nothing I could do about it anyway. I don't know why I thought I could fix it. It was her life, her pain, not mine. Take your time and just notice what happens next. She says, I feel the urge to give her a hug now. You know, this is really very important, she says to me, because in my childhood, a certain ritual developed. After one of my father's episodes of rage, my mother would leave us for a few days. She would just like leave the house for a few days. And when she would come back, I was expected to greet her and give her a hug. This is what was expected of me. And it was so hard for me to hug her when I felt so abandoned. I just couldn't do it. But right now I feel like I can. So imagine that, taking the time to sense it inside you as you do it. She's quiet for a while. She says, I hug her, really hug her, then I get out of there fast, and I close the door behind me. And she says, and this sentence, I submitted her tonight and giving me permission to present this case was that she would get to read it first. And so this last line she added, a couple weeks ago. She says, you know, that hug, it was a hug for both of us. A hug for her and a hug for me. We couldn't get it then, and it's so meaningful to receive it now. So in this last case, this Karen case, I hope I've illustrated how to create and use protective allies, how to embody imaginative images, how to pendulate between different parts of the brain, how to pendulate between different time periods, and actually how to pendulate between different self states. Okay? So I feel like I need to give a commercial here. You know, the somatic journey is slow yet fast. It's profound yet unbelievably regulating for the client and for the therapist. And you can use as much or as little of it as you like. It's easily integratable. And somatic interventions can deepen any therapeutic process that you're using. So if you feel like it, join the crowd. Thank you.